Welcome back to the Weird Canadian. So, I need to talk to you about something that's really been on my mind, and it's probably been on yours too if you've been paying attention to what's happening in Ottawa. Mark Carney, our new Prime Minister, the guy who's supposed to be the steady hand on the wheel after the Trudeau years, the former central banker, the guy who ran the Bank of England, Mr. International Experience himself. Yeah, he's none of that. But here's the thing. Something's bigger. Something bigger is happening here, and I'm not sure everybody's seeing it. A few weeks ago, I started digging into Carney's actual policies. Not the headlines, not the sound bites, the actual strategy. And what I found, it's either the most ambitious repositioning of Canada in our history, or it is a gamble that could blow up in our faces. Today, I'm going to walk you through what I've discovered, and I'm going to be straight with you. I don't have all the answers, but I think you deserve to know what's really going on. So let's get into this. Okay, so let's start with the most dramatic part of his story, because if you missed it, Prime Minister Carney has basically declared Canada's relationship with the US, the one we've had since World War II, over. Not changing, not evolving, over. On March 27, 2025, right after Trump announced 25% tariffs on the auto industry, Carney said, and I quote, "Our old relationship with the US based on deepening integration with our old relationship with the United States based on the deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation is over." Then he said it again in his victory speech on March 29th. The system of open global trade anchored by the US, a system that Canada has relied on since the Second World War, is over. Now, I don't know about you, but when I first heard this, I thought, okay, tough talk, political posturing, standing up for Trump to the cameras, elbows up. But when I actually started looking at what our government is actually doing, but then I started looking at what the government is actually doing. And folks, this isn't just rhetoric. The Guardian called it a eulogy for the US-Canadian relationships. And the BBC said Carney declared the relationship finished. The CFR, that's the Council for Foreign Relations, said Canada is laying the groundwork for a pivot away from the US. And here's what really got my attention. Carney has made 6 trips to Europe since becoming Prime Minister in March. 6 multi-day trips. Do you know how many times he's been to Washington? Twice. And it was brief. So, this isn't just talk. Something's happening here. The question is, what exactly? And is it good for Canada? Alright, so if the old relationship is over, what's the new plan? On October 22nd, literally just a couple days ago, Carney announced a specific goal. Double Canada's non-U.S. exports by 2035. That's a 10-year plan. Now, I understand why this is such a big deal, but you need to know... Now, to understand why this is such a big deal, you need to know where we are right now. Right now, 75% of Canadian exports go to the US. That's 3/4 of our economy. 3/4 of our exports. That's everything from cars to lumber to oil to maple syrup. The US is not just our biggest customer, they're basically our only customer. And Carney wants to change that. Not eliminate it, but reduce our dependence. Make Canada less vulnerable to exactly what Trump's doing with those tariffs. So how is he planning on doing it? Asia. Carney just signed a deal with Indonesia in September. He's targeting the Philippines and Malaysia, South Korea and Japan. He's literally in Asia right now as I'm recording this, attending a summit. And get this, he's trying to set up a meeting with Xi Jinping to reset Canada-China relationships. In Europe, in June, Canada signed something called Security and Defense Partnership with Europe. Carney met with Macron and Keir Starmer in his first week as PM, and there was deeper talks of trade ties with the EU. And just to mention, this is very concerning, just seeing as the EU just came out with a surveillance tactic called the digital ID that is required by everybody to use, and it is mass surveillance, mass control. So we are partnering with countries that like to control their citizens now and don't pride on free speech and free will and free economy and merit and all that fun stuff. I'll get back to it. And here's the domestic part by Canadians. On September 5th, the government announced all government procurement, all taxpayer-funded projects have to be bought from Canadian companies. Period. I don't know how that's possible. We have a lot of tech, or we don't have a whole lot of tech that's available outside of Canada. So you want to build new shit, but all the tech is outside of Canada. Plus, they're working on removing interprovincial trade barriers. It's happening. I'll put that tracker down in the description. You know how it's sometimes harder to sell stuff from Alberta? So, the trade barriers have always been a problem. The fact that we can't even use our own training between provinces is ridiculous. So, Canada is reorienting the idea of an economy north to south, or from north to south to east to west. Less integration in the U.S. and more integration internally, and more connections to the rest of the world. On paper, sounds pretty good, right? Diversification. Not putting all our eggs in one basket. Building Canadian sovereignty. But here's where it gets complicated. Because there's a reason 75% of our exports go to the U.S. And it's not just because we like them. It's geography. We share a 3,500 mile border with the U.S., the longest undefended border in the world. We've been building supply chains with them for 75 years, since 1989. When we signed the free trade agreement, our economies have been, since we signed the free trade agreement in 1989, our economies have been deeply integrated. Take the auto industry. A car might come across the Canada-U.S. border 6 to 7 times during manufacturing. That's how integrated we are. You can't just flip a switch and redirect that to China or Germany. And here's the thing. Previous Canadian governments have tried this before. Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's dad, tried this in 1970. He called it the third option. The idea was to strengthen ties with Europe and Asia to reduce U.S. dependence. It didn't really work out because geography and economics won. Stephen Harper tried too. He negotiated trade deals with Europe and Asia. And you know what? We still send 75% of our goods to the U.S. Peter Moreau, an economics professor at the University of Toronto, has said trying to diversify too much from the U.S. is almost like trying to pull a Brexit. And we saw how well Brexit went for the UK. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's hard. Really hard. And it's going to cost us. This is what Mark Carney's talking about. The sacrifice that we're going to have to make. In the second quarter of 2025, Canada's economy shrunk by 0.4%. That's an annualized rate of 1.6% contraction. Unemployment is above 7%. Exports to U.S. are now down 2%. So the question, is this short-term pain for long-term gain? Or are we making a big mistake? But it's not just about trade. There's a military component to this that I think people aren't talking enough about. Canada is boosting its defense spending from 1.4% of GDP to 2% by March 2026. That's a big jump, and a lot of money going into the Arctic. $6 billion for new Arctic radar systems developed with Australia, not the US. $420 million for next year-round military presence in the north, and plans to buy our next fighter jets from the European supplier instead of the American F-35s. Now think about this for a second. We're part of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. With the US, we've been defending this continent together since 1958. And now we're buying European jets instead of American ones? And here's why the Arctic matters. It's melting. Climate change is opening up the Northwest Passage, a shipping route from Asia to Europe that goes through Canadian waters. If that becomes a major trade route, it's worth trillions. And Canada wants to control it. The US says those are international waters. Canada says those are ours. That disagreement has been theoretical for decades because the route has been frozen. But it won't be theoretical for too much longer. And Carney is positioning Canada to assert sovereignty over the Arctic, with or without America's approval. That is a big deal, because for 75 years, our security has depended on the US defense umbrella. And we're moving away from that. So what's plan B? We barely have enough troops. Canada doesn't want to have a military. The only reason Canada gets involved in its military is when shit gets so bad that we have to step in. That's why the Geneva Conventions were created, because Canadians are so ruthless. But we do it because we're doing it out of our moral capacity. We're saying this is wrong. That's the only time Canadians stand up. When we've got to the point that we're too fed up and the things are gone wrong. Canada doesn't want to be a military. We don't care enough. We'd rather just help the world. Like the kind people we are. Okay, so we're pivoting away from the US towards Asia and Europe. But here's the massive elephant in the room. China. Canada's China relationship have been terrible for years. They detained Canadian citizens. They've interfered in our elections. Xi Jinping publicly scolded Trudeau at the G20. On top of that, I don't think if you remember the Hawaii scandal where China was spying on telecommunications, and there's talk that there is a Chinese police presence in Cape Breton. So we have a little bit of an issue with China. But Carney is trying to reset this relationship. He spoke to Chinese Premier Li Qiang in September, and he's trying to meet Xi in his Asia trip. I'm assuming that's the one he's on right now. Here's the problem. We're going to reduce dependence on the United States by getting closer to China. And most Canadians don't want this. An Angus Reid poll found 59% of Canadians view China negatively, and only 14% think we should seek closer economic ties. Let me just put this into perspective for everybody. China is a communist country. The US is a free country. This could be debatable for opinion, but that is fact. These are actual fact. So Carney wants us to cozy up to a communist regime because he doesn't like the current administration of the U.S. I'm just going to let you sit with that while I get back to what I want to talk about. The U.S. is also watching. Under the USMCA agreement, Canada has been aligning our China policy with Washington. We put 100% tariffs on Chinese electrical vehicles, and China retaliated with tariffs on Canadian canola. Also, something Carney has not talked about or tried to help. So we're stuck. We can't get close to China without angering the US, but if we want to reduce our US dependence, we need alternative markets. And China's the biggest market in the world. This is what experts call being caught between great powers. And historically, middle powers like Canada, who play both sides, usually end up isolated. Look at what just happened with Doug Ford. So why is Carney doing this? To understand that, you need to understand who he is. Mark Carney has spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs. He was the governor of Canada and then the governor of the Bank of England. He's the first foreigner who's ever held that job. He's been on the board of the World Economic Forum, and he's UN Special Envoy to climate change. He's been called the true Davos man. And he said himself, I know how the world works. I know how to get things done. In 2021, he wrote a book called Values, Building a Better World for All. And in it, he argues that a values-led economy based on solidarity, fairness, responsibility, and sustainability. He's a globalist. He believes in multilateral cooperation. That's what he calls a rules-based international order, where countries follow structured principles and laws, not just the dictates of whoever's most powerful. And then Donald Trump comes along, slaps 25% tariffs on Canada, talking about making us the 51st state, tears up the rulebook. So is Carney's strategy deliberately a deliberate plan he's had it all along? Or is he reacting to Trump and making the best of a bad situation? Honestly, I think it's both. I think Carney has always believed Canada should be less dependent on the US, but Trump has gave him the political cover and the urgent necessity to actually do it. And this is what I want to say here. This is ideological led. It has nothing to do with the actual realities of what's going on. This is entirely an ideology he wants to set up. So here's the big question. Is this good for Canada? As far as I'm concerned, I don't believe it's good. We've always had a stable relationship with the United States. And, it doesn't make sense. Yes, we can diversify, but at the same time, we should still be relying on them. They are great. So on one hand, diversification makes sense. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Trump has also shown that the U.S. can be unreliable, and the Arctic could be incredibly valuable for us. Building Canadian sovereignty is a good thing. But geography also doesn't lie, and the U.S. is right there. Supply chains can't be built overnight, and Europe and Asia might not be able to replace the U.S. market reliably for decades. We could end up isolated, alienated from the U.S., and without securing alternatives. So we're going to be building everything homegrown. I don't think people understand what that means. We don't have the facilities to grow it, and now we have to build them. This is the sacrifice. This is the sacrifice Carney is trying to tell you. We are going to basically cut ties to the U.S. We're no longer going to allow trade, I think is what's going to happen. Or we're going to have tariffs so high that it's going to be very expensive to buy these items. So we're going to have, more historic inflation. And I don't think that's a good idea for Canada. I don't think that's a good idea for the U.S. I don't think that's a good idea for the world. Canada needs... The Council on Foreign Relations said this strategy will require time to gradually reduce economic and military dependence on the U.S. Slower economic growth is likely for several years at least. So basically what this means is that 10 years where we've had the slowest economic growth in history, that's going to get even longer. So the question is it right for Canadians to have to sacrifice this? And for how long? 5 years? 10 years? And what happens if it doesn't work? This is the scariest part right now. This is the worst time in history to be doing this because all eyes are on us. So here's what worries me. This is a 10-year plan. But elections happen every 4 years. And if the economy keeps shrinking, if people keep on losing their jobs, if things keep on getting worse before they get better, will Canadians stick with it? Or will we elect somebody else to promise to fix the relationship with the U.S.? Or reverse course? Or are we just going to let the majority of our civilization die? How many people need to move out of Canada before... And if we reverse course after 5 years of pain and investment, we'll have wasted all that time, all that money, all that damage with the U.S. and failed to build anything. That is the worst case scenario. So look, I don't have all the answers. I'm just trying to piece together what I found and what I'm trying to figure out. I am not a liberal or a conservative. I am just trying to figure out how the fuck Canada. I'm gonna write that. Look, I don't have all the answers, but I think we need to be having this conversation because right now the biggest restructuring of Canada's place in the world in 75 years is happening, and I'm not even sure most Canadians realize what is even happening. So maybe Carney is right. Maybe his visionary leadership. Maybe in 20 years, we'll look back and say, thank God we had this chance. Or maybe we are making a huge mistake. Maybe we're throwing away a relationship that, for all its problems, has made Canada the prosperous and secure country it has been for over 3 generations. I don't know which it is. I don't know which we should be talking about. And honestly, I'm a little scared of everything. But I know you are too. And that's why I wanted to talk about this. So what do you think? Is Carney's strategy brilliant or dangerous? Are you willing to accept this economic plan of long-term sovereignty? Or should we be willing to fix things with the US instead? Let me know in the comments. And if you found this valuable, hit that like button and subscribe because I'm going to be digging into stories as this unfolds. I'm the Weird Canadian. Thank you for listening and stay weird.